Pennsylvania is the most pivotal battleground in the race for the White House. With its 19 electoral votes, it is the state where former President Trump and Vice President Harris are spending the most time and money, a combined $436 million between them and their allies. It's also where the results could take days to count due to a state law that prevents mail-in ballots from being processed early. The anticipated lag, which dragged out Pennsylvania's count in 2020, now has election officials bracing for a repeat of conspiracy theories and violence. At the helm, lifelong Republican Al Schmidt. He stood up to former President Trump and refused to join attempts to overturn his loss 4 years ago. As Secretary of State, Schmidt is doing everything he can between now and Election Day to assure residents their votes will count and to take on the lies Trump continues to spread about Pennsylvania. What's the reality? Voter fraud is widespread. Voter fraud never happens.
There is no evidence whatsoever that voter fraud takes place in any way that is widespread at all.
If a non-citizen tried to cast a ballot, would you be able to catch it?
That's just not something that happens, because when it gets identified, there are severe consequences, whether it's prosecution and or deportation from the country.
We met Secretary of State Al Schmidt last month in the state capitol in Harrisburg.
We have to win Pennsylvania.
The night before, former President Trump held a rally just a few hours away where he stoked fears about voting in Pennsylvania.
Now we have this stupid stuff where you can vote 45 days early. I wonder what the hell happens during that 45. Let's move see these votes? We've got about 1 million votes in there. Let's move them. We're fixing.
Have you heard what the former president said last night at his rally here in Pennsylvania?
No.
He seems to be saying that there is cheating going on with mail-in ballots here.
There is not. Elections in Pennsylvania have never been more safe and secure, with a voter-verified paper ballot record of every vote that's cast, whether you vote in person on Election Day or you vote by mail.
Schmidt once had his own doubts about election security. Before becoming Secretary of State, he spent a decade on Philadelphia's Board of Elections, where he investigated hundreds of claims of voter fraud and changed his mind.
Whenever it has occurred, however rarely, it's to affect some very down-ticket race that is decided by a handful of votes. It's not to decide who the President of the United States is, or who the governor is, or who a senator is, or anything else like that.
As Secretary of State, Schmidt is visiting each of Pennsylvania's 67 counties.
Are you registered to vote in Pennsylvania? Your voice matters.
Part roadshow, part public relations tour, spreading the gospel of election security.
Election Day is November 5th. You can vote by mail in advance.
Including a stop at a fair in deep red Columbia County.
Nice to meet you.
He spent more than 35 minutes trying to convince these local Republicans that they can trust the voting system.
Like dead people voting in Philadelphia. You have a public record of when somebody died. You have a public record of when they cast their vote.
They have found cases where, quote, dead people have voted.
The only cases that I've encountered are when a voter has cast their ballot by mail and then passed away in between mailing in their vote and their vote being counted. And you can see that.
You know, former President Trump's got the rallies and he's got the microphone and he's got the audiences, and he can spread his message to thousands, if not millions of people. And you're here at the county fair and you've got to stand, and you're doing it 1 to 3 voters at a time.
Yes, you're one at a timing it.
You kind of can't compete.
But it's also important to have that one-on-one contact, to go to a county fair, to engage with people, to answer their questions.
I love you, Philly!
Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro told us that choosing Al Schmidt, a lifelong Republican, as his first cabinet pick last year was intended to send a clear message. Of all the cabinet appointments that you could have made first, why was it Al Schmidt?
I made a commitment during my campaign that I was going to appoint a pro-democracy Secretary of State.
What were your marching orders to him?
Do your job. Make it so legal, eligible voters have access to the ballot box, and that we, again, have a free and fair, safe and secure election.
When you think about secretaries of state,
the role, you tend to think that it, respectfully, is a boring job, a mundane job, an administrative job. How's that working out for you?
It is. I mean, elections should be not something to dread. They should be something to celebrate. And voters should feel confident that if they cast their vote, whether it's by mail or in person on election day, that their vote is going to be counted.
So in 2020, it took 4 days to call the election in Pennsylvania. What took so long?
When you have half of your voters vote by mail, like we did in 2020, counting those votes takes time.
We saw for ourselves at a ballot intake center in Chester County outside Philadelphia.
So this is the actual envelope, and these where the ballots are returned in.
And this is a sample.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes. And this is
Elections
how we
Administrator
receive
Karen
this
Barsoom showed us how each ballot arrives inside 2 different envelopes.
94 ballots in one tray.
Processing them is a tedious task, which under Pennsylvania law cannot start until 7 a.m. on Election Day.
So when we do open it, there is another envelope. So hypothetically speaking, if we have 100,000 mail-in ballots, we have to deal with double the amount of envelopes, which is a long process. And then the ballots comes out.
And you can't count it folded like that.
Correct. We will need to have a whole different team unfold them, backfold them, to get the creases out as good as we can.
How long does it take to process each ballot?
Several minutes. It's not like done in a sec.
That window of time between the polls closing and races being called, I think has shown to be a real vulnerability where people seeking to undermine confidence in those results if they're going to lose have really exploited.
Those 4 days allowed the big lie to take off.
And that's when you start hearing about truckloads of ballots. And that's when you start hearing about, zombie voters. And that's when all this other stuff really starts pouring in.
There have been widespread calls to bring Pennsylvania in line with the majority of other states, where election workers get a head start on opening envelopes and flattening ballots ahead of Election Day.
Why hasn't that changed? You've had 4 years, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania is unique in that we have a divided legislature. We have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. So getting anything done related to election reform has certainly been a challenge.
The message is what? Be patient with Pennsylvania?
The message is please be patient. Our counties are working night and day to count their voters' votes. They're doing so as quickly as they can and with integrity.
Our job is to make sure we are constantly just providing the truth to voters to be a
For Secretary Schmidt, getting out the message can mean late nights answering questions about the electoral process in granular detail.
It takes time to count millions of votes. And it's
As we saw at this law school in Harrisburg.
We're much better prepared today, 4 years later, than we were.
He's teamed up with fellow Republican, former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett.
The former president has a refrain at his rallies. He says Democrats rigged the election in 2020, and he's not going to let them get away with it this year.
Evidence. Bring it. Any U.S. attorney, any district attorney, bring the evidence and show them. Not what you want. You've got to convince a prosecutor and a court.
You've got polls that show some 34% of Americans, nearly 70% of Republicans, who still to this day believe that Joe Biden didn't win the 2020 election.
But I can't change that because they believe it, because they've heard it so many times.
You've said there's a huge amount of people in the middle that can be influenced by the extremes. Is that who you're trying to educate?
Yes, the extremes we're not going to change. But right here, and in a close election, that's very important.
We won Pennsylvania twice. We won it twice. We did much better the second time than we did the first time.
He continues to say that he won Pennsylvania twice.
Donald Trump won in 2016 by about 44,000 votes, and Donald Trump lost in 2020 by about 80,000 votes. I understand that he's a sore loser. I understand that he wished he would have won in 2020. But attacking this system made up of our neighbors from communities all across Pennsylvania, Republican and Democrat alike, is not the answer.
Former President Trump is refusing to commit to accepting the results if he loses. If he does refuse, what happens here in Pennsylvania? What does that look like?
I think it can look, unfortunately, like what it looked like in 2020, with violence in our communities, with threats to public officials, good public officials like Al Schmidt and the Republican and Democratic clerks of elections. Am I worried about that? Am I concerned about that? Of course I am.
In 2020, as the presidential election hung in the balance, all eyes were on the Pennsylvania Convention Center in Philadelphia. Outside, police and protesters surrounded the building, while inside, Al Schmidt oversaw the counting of a record 375,000 mail-in ballots, most of them from Democratic voters.
We're winning Pennsylvania by a tremendous amount of votes.
Hours after the polls closed, then President Trump demanded the counting stop.
We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
We were working day and night. There was one television that was working, and I happened to be passing it when I heard that speech. So immediately brought together our communications team to begin, through social media platforms, assuring the rest of the world whose eyes were on Pennsylvania that our vote counting was going to continue.
But at that point, you've got the President of the United States saying, stop the count. Did you ever feel like you had to stop the count?
No, not for a second.
After 4 days, the race in Pennsylvania was finally called for Joe Biden, and with that, he won the White House. Former President Trump went after Al Schmidt by name on Twitter, and violent threats from Trump's supporters followed.
Do you remember the first threat that made you go, I got to take this one seriously?
There were threats early on that were pretty generic in nature, but as days went on, they became a lot more specific, providing my address, graphic descriptions of, what they would do to my family.
They used a picture of your house at one point, I understand. Listed your
Yes.
children's names repeatedly. You had to move your family out of your house for safety?
Yes, they had to relocate for a period, and we had security around the clock for many months.
Given all the threats that you faced personally, I've got to ask why you would agree to take this job.
Well, everything is on the line. Our entire system of government, our country as it was founded, is on the line.
With Donald Trump pulling out of his 60 Minutes interview tonight, we'll turn to a different Republican who is paying the price for Trump's claims of a stolen 2020 election. Stephen Richer helps administer voting in Maricopa County, Arizona. That's Phoenix and home to 60% of Arizona voters. Maricopa is often decisive in a state which swings either way. Trump claimed Maricopa County was stolen in 2020. Republican Stephen Richer was determined to find the truth, to restore belief in the ballot. He discovered that truth wasn't what many wanted to hear.
I've become much more cynical about politics. There are a lot of people who have no lines in the sand, a lot of politicians for whom it's like oxygen, that if you told them they weren't going to be reelected, it would be like unplugging them from oxygen. So whichever way the winds are blowing, even if it's highly immoral, they're on for the ride.
What are your fears for this coming election day?
That we'll be doing this again for another 4 years.
Nearly 4 years ago, Republican attorney Stephen Richer was the voters' choice for Maricopa County Recorder, the office that records voter registration and handles ballots by mail. Richer took office after the 2020 vote, when his own party was up in arms over allegations of fraud. It was Richer's first elected office, and he knew what to do.
They just need answers. It's not that complicated of an issue. It's just people are uncertain. They expected Donald Trump to win. I expected Donald Trump to win in Maricopa County. He didn't win. They have questions. As soon as we give them logical, factual answers, all will be well.
And that's not what happened.
That is not what happened.
The logical, factual answers came after multiple investigations. A hand recount of Maricopa County's 2.1 million paper ballots confirmed Joe Biden won. Statewide, prosecutions for illegal voting involved a total of 19 ballots. In Maricopa, 50 ballots had been counted twice for a typical reason.
Somebody made a mistake. A human being made a mistake. There were 2.1 million ballots cast in the 2020 election. These 50 shouldn't have been tabulated. By no means were the 50 all for one candidate or another, so it had a negligible impact on the actual contest.
Negligible, too, because Trump lost Maricopa County by 45,109 votes.
What evidence of widespread fraud was found in Maricopa County in 2020?
Oh, none. And I would say Maricopa County's 2020 election is the most scrutinized election in human history.
When you began to tell your fellow Republicans in Maricopa County that the election was fair and there was no fraud that would change the outcome, how did they react to you?
Not well. Not well at all.
They included Trump, who said, "The entire database of Maricopa County in Arizona has been deleted." He called it an unbelievable election crime.
It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the office looking at the very thing that he was saying we had deleted. And so just sort of the ludicrous nature of it just is offensive.
What did you say in response to what the president had written?
I said something like, this is unhinged. I'm looking at the voter registration database right now. These lies have to stop. This is as disprovable as saying 2 + 2 = 5.
And the reaction was what?
The reaction was significant.
3 violent threats to Stephen Richer have been prosecuted. One man got 3.5 years. The others are awaiting trial.
What we see here is your public statement saying that this was not connected to the internet.
Undaunted, Richer explained the facts. Here, in 2021, he was heckled and followed to his car.
People were banging on my windshield as I got into the car.
What were they shouting?
Turncoat, you're wrong, you're an idiot, don't be a traitor, how could you?
The fever has never broken. This was 3 months ago.
I do not believe the 2020 election was stolen.
So why do so many people remain passionately unconvinced?
I think it has become the tattoo. I think it has become the tattoo to show that you're a true believer of the movement.
You believe the election was stolen?
I do.
Shelby Bush started a political action committee which investigates what she calls widespread fraud in Maricopa County, fraud no credible investigation has found. She's taken in nearly $1 million in donations for the work of her PAC, and the Arizona Republican Party awarded her the leadership of its delegation at last summer's national convention.
And that's why I, Shelby Bush, the delegation chair, and our wonderful state chairwoman, Gina Swoboda, and this entire delegation cast their 43 delegates to Donald J. Trump!
You are a rising star in the state party.
Well, I definitely have brought some attention onto myself. That is for sure.
What do you believe happened in the Maricopa vote in 2020?
I believe that fraudulent votes were put into the system. I also believe that a lot of state statutes and regulations and policies were broke, which makes the election questionable at best.
Bush still questions whether signature verification was proper and whether some ballots were collected illegally. She's an administrator in a medical practice.
You're self-educated.
That's correct.
when it comes to elections.
That's correct.
In a recent case, a judge disqualified you from testifying in the case because he said you were, quote, obviously unqualified, not even in the ballpark.
That's one judge's opinion, who is a radical leftist, who is legislating from the bench, and I don't believe that it had any merit in my credibility whatsoever.
Is there a danger in undermining people's faith in the election system by persisting with these conspiracy theories that no one has been able to validate?
Again, I'm going to disagree with you, sir, respectfully. It has been validated. And because the election...
By whom?
The election officials...
Give me a court case. Give me something.
I don't need a government official with a vested interest in disproving information to tell me whether what I have is valid. It's up to each individual citizen as a member of this society to review the evidence, to think for themselves and make those decisions.
It's valid because you say it is.
I say it's valid because I say it is. And if somebody looks at it, they can determine whether it's valid. The evidence speaks for itself. Data does not lie. Data doesn't lie. Election officials do.
The election was not stolen. It was lost.
Attorney Ben Ginsburg has represented the Republican Party in many of its most important election cases. In 2022, he joined conservative judges and senators in Lost, Not Stolen, an investigation that exposes election fraud lies. Part of it centers on Trump's swing state lawsuits.
Donald Trump and his supporters brought 64 cases. They lost 63 of them outright. There was one that was a partial victory involving 200 votes, far from outcome determinative.
And all of that told you what?
The evidence to back up the allegations of fraud and elections being unreliable simply does not exist.
The election deniers in Arizona will say, we did lose all those cases, but the judges weren't fair.
Under the rule of law, you have every right to submit your litigation. But under the rule of law, a conservative principle, a Republican principle for as long as I've been practicing election law, you have to accept the rulings of the court.
I don't have time, frankly, to worry about whether people believe me or question my integrity. I have what I believe is the mission that I am on, and that mission is for my children and my grandchildren. I am not here to make friends. I am here to do a job.
Where does that mandate for that mission come from?
It comes from my own personal drive, and it also comes from, I believe, a calling from God.
Mr. Chair and Board.
It has been a calling for many.
Fear God.
Over nearly 4 years, in meetings of the Republican-led Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, which certifies the vote.
Venezuela Dominion machine. Our election in America is a joke, and Maricopa is a joke.
You are the cancer that is tearing this nation apart! Good day!
Have you been accused of treason?
Oh, yeah. Treason. Murdering fellow officials that would talk.
Republican Clint Hickman has been a county supervisor 11 years. In 2020, he was among Trump's most loyal supporters.
Maricopa County Supervisor Clint Hickman.
Still proud that he took the time to call me out and thank me for the work that I was trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Clint. Good job, Clint.
But Hickman saw no evidence of fraud and said so when he voted to certify the election.
All in favor, say aye.
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 You've received a number of death threats.
I've lost count. And so have my colleagues. And so have election workers.
Well, you've lost count, but here's one.
Hello, Mr. Hickman. I am glad that you are standing up for democracy and want to place your hand on the Bible and say that the election was honest and fair. I really appreciate that. When we come to lynch your stupid, lying, commie ass, you'll remember that you lied on the Bible, you piece of. You're going to die, you piece of. We're going to hang you. We're going to hang you.
That man is in prison for 2.5 years, but there were others.
But the chilling one that you didn't play is one of the guys said, "We know the restaurants that you are in, and we know where your kids go to school."
Menace grew in the shadows and emerged on the stage.
I hear the word unity and I get sick to my stomach because there is a lot of earthly, fake, and vile unity talk going around in our state.
This is Shelby Bush, the Maricopa County Republican Party Vice Chair, talking about fellow Republican Stephen Richer this past March.
So what does unity mean to me? It means unifying with those that share the core biblical Christian Judeo principles that we share. That's unity. But if Stephen Richer walked in this room, I would lynch him. I don't unify with people who don't believe in the principles we believe in the American cause that founded this country.
When you heard Shelby Bush say that she would lynch you,
Yeah.
you thought what?
Well, I first thought, like, why is that word in your vocabulary? Lynch is a weirdly, historically loaded and oddly specific term.
Bush offered a modified definition of lynching.
So I think many people are familiar with a political lynching. It's referred to as destroying someone's career. It was not ever meant physically in any way, shape, or form. Probably a poor choice of words.
You have seen the unrest in this county, the civil disorder in this county. You're contributing to that.
What I am doing is I am shining a big bright light on the disdain and the arrogance of some of the elected officials. They are elected to represent the interests of the people. And until they are ready to step up and do that, then there will be unrest.
Is election denialism a swindle?
Oh, 100% so for some people. It's a swindle emotionally for some, it's a swindle politically for some, it's a swindle economically for some.
This past July, Stephen Richer ran in the primary for re-election. He lost to a fellow Republican who said Maricopa elections are a laughingstock. Richer moves on after this election, leaving behind his enduring contribution, the fortress defenses around the center where the votes are counted. A wall to defend America from Americans.
I have seen some ugliness in the character of human beings. It has given me great insight into horrific moments of human history. I would look at some of these historical moments and say, like, well, that couldn't happen here. But moments like these begin to give you insight on how stuff like that can build up, how the animal passions, how going along with the crowd, how the emotions of just being your side versus their side. It's just to say that some of the same human impulses that I didn't understand, I now do understand.
You understand how things can go wrong.
I understand how a society of educated people can do something truly horrible.
It's the vote that holds America together. Belief that with a ballot, voices are heard, disputes are addressed, and there's always another chance. Countries without this belief tend to be in bondage or at war. Election day is coming, but across America, belief is under attack. Politicians who say the 2020 election was stolen are running for governor in 19 states, attorney general in 10, and in 12 states, election deniers are running for Secretary of State, which would give them power over elections. After 2 years of investigations and audits, no fraud or error has been found in any state that would change the 2020 outcome. But in 2022, spreading doubt has been key to an endorsement from Donald Trump. No state has been more deeply riven by this than Arizona, where a split in the GOP has Republicans on opposite sides of a Grand Canyon.
On one side of the Arizona chasm stands Rusty Bowers, a lifelong Republican and artist who became Arizona's Speaker of the House. Bowers told us he was disappointed when Joe Biden won. So when President Trump and Rudy Giuliani called after the election, he was listening.
First, Rudy started, he said, well, there's been a lot of fraud all across the country and in Arizona, and then he listed off large numbers in categories that would be illegal, dead people, stolen ballots.
Bowers says Giuliani wanted him to hold a vote to revoke Biden's electors.
And I said, but Rudy, I want the proof. You're going to give me the proof? And he said, yes.
So Giuliani and co-counsel Jenna Ellis flew out to meet Bowers.
You left the meeting with Rudy Giuliani thinking what?
That I wasn't happy. I said, okay, time out. Mr. Giuliani, you said you were going to bring me some proof, names, etc., of all of these people. Did you bring me the proof? He looked at Jenna Ellis and he said, do we have the proof? And she said, yes, we do. Do you have it with you? No. Where is it? Well, it might be back at the hotel room. And I said, I asked you for the proof. You said you'd bring it. You're not bringing it. You're asking me to break my oath and make up something to pull electors and replace electors, which has never been done in the history of the United States. And I'm going to try that on my state.
Without Bowers, Giuliani found an ally willing to call the vote criminal, Arizona State Representative Mark Finchem.
It's exceedingly hard for me to place a label on what we've heard other than racketeering. Good old-fashioned mobster racketeering. We're caught between the
4 weeks after Mr. Trump's defeat, Finchem held an unofficial hearing featuring Giuliani.
A conspiracy that was hatched by the crooked leaders of the Democratic Party.
A day of allegations without credible evidence ended with this.
When Satan wants to extinguish a light, he will stop at nothing. So be on your guard, put on the full armor of God, and be prepared to fight.
Mark Finchem fought, and now the 65-year-old former police officer is the Republican nominee for Arizona's Secretary of State, which would give him authority over elections.
Ladies and gentlemen, we know it, and they know it. Donald Trump won.
But Mark Brnovich does not know it. He's Arizona's Republican Attorney General who's investigated for 2 years and has a word for claims of fraud.
Horse, and that's what it is. Most of it's horse, and I've been trying to scrape it off my shoes for the last year.
Brnovich supported Trump, who called him with advice.
He goes, all you got to do is say the election's fraudulent and you will be a superstar. You'll be the most popular guy in America. And I told him, I said, Mr. President, I didn't become Attorney General to be a star. I brought my star with me. And I don't need anybody, whether it's the former president or any other person, validating what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
What he's doing is bringing indictments in every 2020 vote fraud case that he can back with evidence. Altogether, to date, from the general election, Arizona has indicted 12 defendants in cases involving a total of 12 ballots. 12. Statewide. Biden won Arizona by 10,000.
There was no one in this country that wanted to find evidence of fraud more than I did. But I thought it was important to systematically go through and say, no, this is the facts, this is the evidence, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But when you're an actual prosecutor, when you're the actual government, there's a higher obligation. You can't afford to be sloppy.
In addition to Brnovich's investigations, in 2021, the Republican-led state Senate audited Phoenix's Maricopa County, home to 60% of the state vote. The audit was done by a company that had never audited an election. The audit's hand recount confirmed Joe Biden won. But its report also raised questions about discrepancies it found. Those questions were answered online in detail by Maricopa County. Still, widespread fraud is Mark Fincham's charge.
When you steal something, that's not really a win. That's a fraud.
That was in Washington the day before the attack on the Capitol, which Fincham describes this way.
This entire J6 crap was manufactured to create a narrative that there was an assault on the Capitol. This fits into the Marxist ideology of how do you go to one-party rule.
Today, Fincham is running neck and neck with his Democratic opponent, Adrian Fontes, who helped lead the 2020 election in Maricopa County.
We are far too divided away from each other based on lies and conspiracies. And we as election administrators across Arizona have to do a better job showing folks that the system is quite good.
I'd like to see a world where it's easy to vote but hard to cheat.
We asked Fincham for credible proof of fraud. He raised not evidence, but those questions from the state Senate audit. Next, Fincham told us about a mysterious post-election email which he featured in a rally.
Where we had a whistleblower who sent an email not just to the DOJ, but to every single legislator saying, there's 35,000 fictitious voters, and they've been inserted in the system where you'll never find them. Well, we believe we found them.
In the email Fincham speaks of, a Brian Watson said Democrats added bogus votes electronically in Pima County. The writer had no evidence, asked not to be contacted, and closed his email account.
Why would you give this any credence?
Again, it's an open question. I want to know, was there a possibility that this happened? Now, we've now proven that it happened, Scott.
How so?
We've got 2 precincts that show over 100% of the people registered to vote in that precinct voted. That is an undeniable fact.
But it is deniable by Pima County, which says no precinct had more votes than voters. Another of Fincham's frequent points concerns a pair of indictments.
We have, for example, in Yuma County, ballot harvesting and votes. I mean, we've got people who were indicted for the very thing that we're talking about right now, who pled guilty. And frankly, those votes altered the outcome of Yuma County. Yuma County, we've actually had indictments and people that have pled guilty to ballot trafficking.
How many ballots were involved?
I don't know off the top of my head.
It's 4.
Okay. Whether it's 4 or 4,000, doesn't matter.
It wasn't the presidential election, it was a primary.
It doesn't matter. It's a defect in the system.
A minuscule defect. 2 women in Yuma County pleaded guilty to collecting 4 ballots and dropping them in a ballot box. It's against state law to deposit a ballot that isn't yours or your family's.
It's 4 ballots in a primary.
In that instance. In that instance.
You have a bigger one?
Well, we've got information that's been turned over to the Attorney General's office, and you say that there was nothing there. Okay. Then I'm going to have to live with that. But do I know for a fact that there were other ballot trafficking operations around the country and some in Arizona? Yeah, I do.
Name one.
Yuma County, 25,000 ballots.
What happened?
Same fingerprints on those ballots for 5 individuals. So where'd that go? Where's that evidence? I know it's been turned over to the Attorney General's office. I know that the FBI field office actually did the prints.
That's false, according to the FBI. Yuma County told us that no one in law enforcement fingerprinted 25,000 ballots. Fincham often says that evidence is with Attorney General Brnovich, implying that something big is coming.
In fact, he has a mountain of evidence that's sitting in his office.
But Brnovich told us his investigation is essentially over.
We as prosecutors deal in facts and evidence, and I'm not like the clowns that throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks.
Clowns.
Clowns. Did I say that? Yes, I think that there were a lot of clowns out there that they saw what they wanted to see. What is that Simon Garfunkel line that a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest? There was a lot of that going on.
It's going on in the top Arizona races, where the Republican for governor is a denier.
We had a fraudulent election, a corrupt election, and we have an illegitimate president sitting in the White House.
It's like a giant grift in some ways.
A grift, a swindle, is what you're saying.
Yes.
All of these accusations, the case in Yuma, scaremongering, the Brian Watson email, scaremongering. You called Arizona the epicenter of fraud. It's scaremongering. It's not the fraud that is breaking people's faith in our elections. It's people like you.
So you say. But when we look at the violations of state statute, this is the epicenter of the problem.
Nationwide, 190 election deniers are running for the U.S. House and 14 for the U.S. Senate, according to the Brookings Institution. Mark Brnovich lost his primary to a denier, and so did Rusty Bowers, which may come as a relief.
Don't come over. Don't come over.
Post-election, Trump supporters and conspiracy spinners laid siege to Bowers' home up to 3 times a week.
Rusty Bowers is a pedophile.
You go home.
He had to fend them off. A man with a pistol, demonstrators in their own armored car. And at the state capitol, on January 6, 2021, they came with rifles and a guillotine. In Arizona, when belief in the vote eroded, this is what filled the void.
Has the Republican Party that you've known all your life been hijacked?
It's a large group of them that is doing the hijacking. I just don't think it's a majority. Its effectiveness as a party and its legitimacy in public discourse is grossly undermined by how they've acted in this state.
It was just days after the 2020 presidential election that lawyers supporting then-President Donald Trump began spreading unsubstantiated claims that an American company, Dominion Voting Systems, had rigged the election. They said Dominion was backed by Venezuela and that its machines and software switched millions of votes from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. They never showed any evidence, but that didn't stop pro-Trump attorneys from making baseless claims or conservative news networks from giving them plenty of airtime. Dominion has filed 8 lawsuits seeking more than $10 billion in damages against Fox News and other networks, corporations, and individuals. But Dominion's CEO, John Poulos, has remained largely silent until now. We spoke with him about the lawsuits, the lies, and the irreparable damage he says they've caused to his company and his employees.
People have been put into danger. Their families have been put into danger. Their lives have been upended, and all because of lies. It was a very clear calculation that they knew there were lies and they were repeating them and endorsing them.
It's important to you people admit what they said was wrong.
It's important to me. It's important to all the people whose families have been impacted by this. Anderson, my kids still are not allowed to get any package from the front door until we verify that it's actually from a trusted sender.
You're that concerned about somebody sending something to your house?
It's not unfounded concern.
People have done that.
People have done this. People are warning that they will continue to do this.
For John Poulos and his company, the trouble began 5 days after the election when Fox Business host Maria Bartiromo brought up Dominion with attorney Sidney Powell.
Sidney, we talked about the Dominion software. I know that there were voting irregularities. Tell me about that.
That's to put it mildly. The computer glitches could not and should not have happened at all. That is where the fraud took place, where they were flipping votes in the computer system or adding votes that did not exist.
Sidney Powell was never able to show fraud, but she was repeatedly invited back on Fox networks, as was the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who also wove a false narrative about Smartmatic, an election technology company which is now suing Giuliani, Fox News, and others.
Smartmatic is a company that was formed by 3 Venezuelans who were very close to the dictator Chavez of Venezuela. And it was formed in order to fix elections. That's the company that owns Dominion.
Does Smartmatic own Dominion?
No. We do have a relationship. We are competitors.
Were you associated with the late Hugo Chavez?
Absolutely not.
Do you use a Venezuelan company's software that's been used to steal election in other countries?
Absolutely not. Anderson, I can cut all of this short. We were founded in Toronto, which is where my family was from, and there was nothing to do with Venezuela.
Can you flip votes in the computer system? Can you add votes that did not exist?
Absolutely not.
President Trump first mentioned Dominion in a tweet November 12th and recorded this video a few weeks later, which was posted on Facebook.
We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this? We have to go to paper. Maybe it takes longer, but the only secure system is paper.
Why not just have paper ballots?
We do have paper ballots. What the machines do is they count those paper ballots in a way that makes it very easy for people to verify after the fact through the means of audits and recounts.
Dominion makes 2 types of machines. One is called a ballot marker. It's a touchscreen device that a voter can use to mark their choices and then print the ballot. The second machine is a scanner that reads that paper ballot, counts the vote, and immediately stores the ballot securely.
A voter takes a paper ballot. They've made their marks, however they make their marks, depending on the jurisdiction. As they deposit it into the ballot box, it goes through a digital scanner and then drops into the ballot box. So how do you hack a paper ballot? With our system,
he showed us how it works.
This is the scanner that sits atop a locked and sealed ballot box. This is how they cast their ballot. Goes through a scanner, and now we have an image of the ballot that we just cast, and we have the paper ballot that is used for recounts.
John Poulos says it was watching the presidential recounts in Florida in 2000, with those arguments over hanging chads, that got him interested in improving how paper ballots were marked and counted. He was an engineer working at a startup in Silicon Valley and began looking at ways to make it easier to recount paper ballots and to help people with disabilities vote without assistance.
Our goal was to allow any voter to make their marks on a paper ballot in a very clear, unambiguous way, regardless of physical ability.
John Poulos is Canadian and founded Dominion in 2002. He remains its chief executive, though it was acquired by an American investment group in 2018. Dominion is based in Denver. Do you ever think to yourself, I got into this to help paraplegics and blind people vote more easily, and look what happened?
I think about it all the time.
Dominion is one of 3 companies that make most of the voting systems in America. In the 2020 presidential election, their machines were in 28 states, red states and blue. On election day, in a precinct, are your machines hooked up to the internet?
No, not by any stretch. We go through a number of certifications, government certifications, and the first one is at a federal level. So those standards mandate that election systems, such as ours, are designed to work in a closed system, air-gapped, no internet.
In all the major swing states of 2020, there are paper ballots backing up.
Not only are there paper ballots that make up the official record, those paper ballots have been hand counted and audited over 1,000 times on just the 2020 election.
Recounts and audits in the swing states of Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada all confirmed Dominion's results. More than 60 lawsuits around the country challenging the election by Trump or his supporters were ultimately withdrawn or failed. In Georgia, there have been 3 recounts, 2 electronic ones and 1 hand recount.
In front of cameras, bipartisan poll watchers, and thousands of local residents across the state of Georgia, and it once again reaffirmed the results. That should have put an end to all of it, but the lies persisted.
And so have incidents of harassment and threats against John Poulos and his employees.
Every single person at Dominion is going to end up in an orange jumpsuit in handcuffs. You whores, you cheating pigs.
Yeah, good afternoon, scumbags. We're going to blow your building up, piece of shit.
I don't wish to sit here and say that this is something that happened 18 months ago. This is something that continues to happen every single day for us. Last Friday, we had an office on lockdown. 2 days prior to that, I was on a phone call with one of our employees, who's a mother of two, very upset and crying. It's hard to talk about.
Had something been said to her personally?
A very disgusting death threat in detail.
Received
on her personal cell phone.
It's completely and utterly surreal. None of these lies have been substantiated to any extent. Every single one of them has been debunked.
Chris Krebs was director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, charged with protecting the 2020 election. He called it the most secure election in American history, and days later was fired by President Trump. He now has a cyber consulting firm and is a contributor for CBS News. We showed him a press conference held 2 days after his firing at the headquarters of the Republican National Committee, when Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and others continued their attacks on Dominion machines and software.
It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden.
Do you remember watching that?
Yeah, I tweeted about it immediately afterwards. I think I said something along the lines of that was the most insane and dangerous 45 minutes of TV in, American history, effectively.
How secure was the 2020 election?
Let me put it this way. It was the most litigated. It was the most scrutinized. It was the most audited. This election was put through the ringer from so many different directions. And what I tend to like to say is, don't listen to me. Listen to Bill Barr. Bill Barr said it. He was then the Attorney General of the United States.
This is what Bill Barr later said to the January 6th committee.
These claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people.
Dominion began alerting Fox News and other networks of the false allegations they were broadcasting November 12th, 4 days after Sidney Powell first discussed Dominion with Maria Bartiromo. But Dominion says Fox News never retracted their reporting. You gave them a lot of chances to correct their statements.
They still haven't corrected them.
To me, that's the most powerful part of the complaint.
Lee Levine is a First Amendment attorney who's litigated cases for 40 years on behalf of most media companies, including CBS and Fox. He's retired now, but his old firm is currently representing CNN and me in a separate matter, filed by attorneys who also represent Dominion in its cases against Fox News and others.
Take the Fox case, for example. November 12th seems to me to be the key date in that case, because that's the day that Dominion started on a regular basis sending information sheets to every producer on every show at Fox that was having Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani on, saying, here are the true facts. Here are links supporting our assertions that these are the true facts. And then these people continued to invite Giuliani and Powell on their shows.
Defamation cases are hard to prove, aren't they?
Yes, they are. The plaintiff has to prove what the law calls actual malice. You need to show basically that the defendant published or broadcast a deliberate lie, a calculated falsehood.
They knew it was a lie when they broadcast it.
They knew it was a lie, or they knew it was probably a lie.
How strong is Dominion's case against Fox and the others?
I think it is much stronger than most defamation cases that I have seen. I might say it is the strongest.
How many defamation cases have you seen?
I have litigated myself hundreds, and I'm certainly aware of every significant defamation case in the last 40 years.
And this is the strongest one?
in my judgment.
In a statement to 60 Minutes, Fox said it's confident it will prevail, citing freedom of the press protections, and stating it was reporting on a newsworthy allegation made by the then president and aired segments fact-checking the allegations against Dominion. Dominion is suing Fox News and its parent corporation for $1.6 billion each, and in its statement, Fox said that Dominion's financial demand is unsupported. Efforts by Fox News and other defendants to have the lawsuits dismissed have been rejected by the courts.
Do you think that you can show not only that they lied, but they knew that they were lying?
I think that's the easiest part.
You, as a company, told them specifically, repeatedly.
We told them. We told them in real time. Others told them. Government officials told them. Partisan government officials told them. People inside the Trump administration told them. Local election officials on both sides of the aisle told them. This is not a matter of not knowing the truth. They knew the truth.
The 2020 presidential election had record-setting turnout, with more than 145 million ballots cast. While President-elect Joe Biden collected more of those votes, and news organizations have projected him as the winner, President Trump has refused to concede. He has called for recounts and filed lawsuits questioning the validity of many of those ballots, mostly the ones cast by mail all over the country. As COVID spiked again, vote-by-mail ballots flooded tabulation centers. Other ballots jammed street-side drop boxes or were hand-delivered to registrars and city clerks. What could have been chaos instead became an exercise in democracy. We saw that firsthand in 5 separate counties across the swing state of Pennsylvania, with its crucial 20 electoral votes. There, we had some questions for the people responsible for counting the vote. President Trump has said bad things happen in Philadelphia. Are bad things happening in Philadelphia?
In the birthplace of our republic, counting votes is not a bad thing. Counting votes cast on or before Election Day by eligible voters is not corruption. It is not cheating. It is democracy.
Al Schmidt is one of 3 commissioners who run elections in Philadelphia, and the lone Republican.
There really should not be a disagreement, regardless of party affiliation, when we're talking about counting votes cast on or before Election Day by eligible voters. It's not a very controversial thing, or at least it shouldn't be.
But yet it is.
Unfortunately, yes. And we've done in the past.
We first met Commissioner Schmidt back in September. With the country in the grip of the pandemic, Schmidt was expecting a flood of mail-in ballots.
When you have half of your voters vote by mail,
and urging patience,
you will not know the outcome on election night.
He couldn't have been more right. The flood became a deluge. 360,000 mail-in ballots poured in Philadelphia. That was more than all the mail-in votes in the state in 2016. More than 90% were from Democrats. As those ballots were counted in the convention center in Philadelphia this past week, President Trump's initial lead in Pennsylvania slowly was chipped away. On Wednesday, with hundreds of thousands of votes still to count, President Trump tweeted he had won the state. His campaign and party started filing lawsuits claiming voting irregularities and fraud, especially in Philadelphia.
We are going to file suit in Pennsylvania.
The president's son, Eric, and Rudy Giuliani rushed to Philadelphia to assert with great urgency, but no evidence, that democracy itself was under attack.
This is absolute fraud. We've seen it in Philadelphia before.
By the end of the week, with former Vice President Joe Biden inching ahead in the vote count, the number of Trump campaign and GOP lawsuits hit double digits in Pennsylvania, most aimed at disrupting the count. Pennsylvania is living up to its reputation as a crucial battleground in presidential elections. In 2016, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton here by less than 1% of the vote.
Each ballot must be counted.
With a similar edge over President Trump, news organizations on Saturday projected former Vice President Joe Biden had won Pennsylvania and the presidency. 46! Spontaneous celebrations broke out in Philadelphia and across the country. Still, the Trump campaign is going to court to challenge the validity of the vote in Pennsylvania and other battleground states.
Obviously, he's not going to concede.
The president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, said he'll start filing lawsuits Monday.
I don't know if there's enough evidence to set aside the entire election. Certainly not around the country, maybe in Pennsylvania.
The stakes are high, and passions were high all week. Thursday, 2 Virginia men found with weapons and ammunition in their car but no gun permit were arrested outside the convention center. Inside, Republican Commissioner Schmidt, his fellow election board members, and about 200 city employees are continuing to work. They'll be counting provisional ballots for at least another week.
From the inside looking out, it feels all very deranged.
Deranged.
At the end of the day, we are counting eligible votes cast by voters. The controversy surrounding it is something I don't understand. It's people making accusations that we wouldn't count those votes, or people are adding fraudulent votes, or just coming up with just all sorts of crazy stuff.
Accusations like you are cheating.
Yes.
You are manipulating the vote.
Yes. Or calls to our offices reminding us that this is what the Second Amendment is for. People like us.
You're getting calls like that?
Yes.
That's a not-so-veiled death threat.
Yes. For counting votes in a democracy.
The election here had been running smoothly. 60 Minutes dropped in on 5 pivotal counties. Northampton in the Northeast voted twice for Barack Obama, then flipped to Donald Trump in 2016. We saw long lines of voters there waiting patiently to cast ballots on Election Day. In neighboring Luzerne County, we saw orderly vote counting under the watchful gaze of party poll watchers certified by the state. It was the same in the affluent suburbs around Philadelphia.
You are allowed in there. And
Pat Poprick, chair of the Bucks County GOP, is a proud partisan. But when it comes to running clean elections, she told us she's bipartisan.
We may like different candidates, but we want the process to be fair. And I think we're working very hard in our county, and I'm very, very proud of our commissioners, our board. We're all working together to make sure the voters can vote.
Democrats and Republicans.
Absolutely.
But that spirit of cooperation only goes so far. The number of Republican court cases keeps growing. One of the fiercest concerns poll watchers. The Trump campaign is in Pennsylvania courts alleging their observers can't get close enough to see what's going on. President Trump railed about that in his speech Thursday night.
In Philadelphia, observers have been kept far away, very far away, so far that people are using binoculars to try and see, and there's been tremendous problems caused.
It is reckless and disappointing that there are some on the outside who either don't know what's going on or don't care to know what's going on, who are lying about what's happening here in Pennsylvania.
Democrat Josh Shapiro is Pennsylvania's Attorney General. He won re-election this past week. He's defending the state against Republican lawsuits he calls frivolous.
They were asking for 2 things, Bill. Number 1, to stop the count, and number 2, to allow their watchers to get closer to where the envelopes were being opened and scanned. On the first issue, being able to stop the count, they failed. And on the second thing, an agreement was reached to move these poll watchers from roughly 10 feet away to roughly 6 feet away. No material change whatsoever.
The president and his campaign have said there are many irregularities here in Pennsylvania.
Let me break this down for you. Each campaign had observers in the room while the ballots were being counted. In addition to that, even if you're not a certified watcher, you can turn on the live stream and watch it on TV and keep an eye on the activity if you'd like.
You heard the president's speech on Thursday night. He was claiming that the election's being stolen from him.
Donald Trump can say whatever he wants. But we just had an election that was secure, an election where the votes are tallied, and a proper winner will be certified based not on the words of President Trump, but the votes of the American people.
So get in line, stay in line, because it's all on the line.
Pennsylvania State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta spent Election Day urging voters to get to the polls. The Democrat represents a predominantly black district in North Philadelphia.
I think about the people who died. I mean, literally died and bled. So every single person could vote in this country.
He says the Trump campaign's attempt to stop the count smacks of voter suppression.
They're trying to steal an election by not having every vote count. And in an election, if you think you're going to win, you don't try to stop the counting. You want every vote counted. We're going to count every single vote. And all they can do is what they've done, to try to throw sand in the gears, to try to make the process as slow as possible, and then fill that time of delay with conspiracy theories and nonsense.
So what do you think of this now that the Trump campaign is going to court complaining about these delays?
This is what the president does. He wants to create confusion and chaos and then say, oh my God, there's so much confusion and chaos. And then I say, well, pick up a mirror. Of course there's confusion and chaos. You created it.
I've been doing this a long time. This is the type of litigation strategy where you throw the kitchen sink at the wall and see what sticks.
Ben Ginsberg is a Republican attorney who has spent almost 4 decades immersed in election law.
Count every vote! Count every vote!
During the Florida recount in 2000, he helped spearhead the controversial legal strategy that won the presidency for George W. Bush. He says this is no Florida 2000 and calls President Trump's strategy incoherent. What is this litigation designed to do then?
On the one hand, it's lawyers reacting to a client who is disjointed and unhinged and not terribly accepting of defeat. And on the other extreme, this could be an instance of trying to slow down counts in individual states in the hopes that those states don't complete their job of certifying election results in time for the Electoral College to meet. And then he would go back to something else he's talked about, which is telling legislators to go and vote Trump slates, even in states that were won by Biden.
Ginsberg, a lifelong Republican, hopes it doesn't come to that. If you could get the ear of the president, what would you say to him?
Sir, you need to take a step back, look at the results. It is a democracy. It is a country that's been very good to you, and you need to respect the institutions, and the greatest institution of all is our elections that lead to the peaceful transfer of power, and you cannot be destructive of that.
Saturday night, now President-elect Joe Biden told voters the democratic process is working.
We've won with the most votes ever cast on a presidential ticket in the history of the nation. 74 million.
Not far from Independence Hall, the counting of provisional, mail-in, and military ballots continues. For Republican Election Commissioner Al Schmidt, each ballot is a precious reminder of what's at stake.
The real damage is not who wins and who loses or who gets elected or not. The real damage, I think, is how we all react to this process, so that at the end of the day, we all have confidence that all the voices are heard, and win or lose, these are the people that we, the people, have elected to represent us.